Welcome back, everybody. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And today, again, very gratefully, we have one of our summer fellows with us. Mia is at Brown, and we got to know her through an organization called Girls Who Invest, which I think they should really call Women Who Invest, to be perfectly honest. This is one of my pet peeves is women calling other women girls in the workplace. It happened yesterday in a job interview, and I was like, women. But anyway, and for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work, and Mia's on our team for the summer. And Mia, question's yours.
Yeah. So Roy, today I'm going to ask you about succeeding in an entry-level job and what are the things you think I should know about that?
Yeah, I was going to say email. That emailing really well is like one of these fundamental skills where paying attention to how people email in a workplace is one of these differences that I see with people entering the workforce. But let me get back to email though, because I think that that's wrong in that it only applies to certain kinds of jobs. I mean, I think not every entry-level job, for example, even provides you with an email address. I mean, the most common entry-level job in the United States, I believe, for women is working in retail, and for men is truck driving. The most common overall is working in retail. I think cashier is literally the single most common entry-level job in the United States. And, cashiers don't get email addresses, generally speaking, in most organizations. The thing that I think does work, and this is when I was a summer intern myself, unpaid, by the way, different era, working at NBC News, my boss was a great guy named Ben Sherwood, who ended up running all of ABC television and a real mentor to me in many ways. And he said this thing, he's like, figure out what your boss's problem is and solve it. He said that's what he used to do, is show up every day and think, what are the problems my boss is worried about? And then try to eliminate those problems. And so, for example, in the case of working at NBC News, Ben was my boss. He was one of the producers. And one of his problems at the beginning of the day was, what should our stories be? And so I'd show up really early in the office and say, like, here's some stories I found interesting. 99% of those things he had already seen, but we were able to have the conversation. The reason I think it's that I don't think that's perfect advice either, in the sense that sometimes your boss is actually not a good representative of their own organization, right? Sometimes bosses are venal. Sometimes they're self-interested in ways that undercut the organization. And so one of the reasons work is hard is there are very few simple principles that always apply. And so all the things being equal, try to trust that your boss knows the right thing. Ask yourself the question of, does it seem like the boss is doing the things that are in the interest of the organization? And then solve it. If you're in an information industry job, definitely pay attention to email. And the reason I say that is, while I know in school people do use email, I think the mix of communication for many people entering the workforce is much more text heavy, much more like DMs heavy, and that their email style is something that they're sometimes just unfamiliar with. And so just paying attention to how people email, like what is the word choice? How formal are they? Stuff like that, how quickly do they respond can be really powerful. So those are a couple of generic-ish suggestions. I'm curious how those land with you or what other questions you have.
Right. Yeah. So I guess going off that, I know you mentioned that sometimes your boss may not be the best representative of not you. But how do you think then, like, the best way to familiarize yourself with the culture and the mission of your firm is, and doing that in a way that's like valuable, like being a value add alongside that?
Yeah, I think that it's hard because it's a difficult thing in some organizations to do very explicitly. Like, we'd love to work in organizations where you can say to the person for whom you work, like, what is the culture of this organization? But many organizations actually have a culture that doesn't talk much about culture and that may judge you for talking about culture. Now, you may not want to be in that place, but you may discover yourself in that place. And so the first thing I like to do is pay attention to the stuff that is costless information. And what I mean by costless information is information where I don't need to ask anybody to do anything in order for me to get that information. So, like, I'm shocked how many people start a job without familiarizing themselves deeply with like the organization's own website. It's like, you should know that stuff. If the organization has recent press releases, like, read that stuff. And so that's all costless information. Another example of costless information is internal communications and internal tools. So once you start, you might get access to the organization's Slack. You might get access if they have an intranet. And there's often so much stuff there. And it's not so much like read it so that you know it all. It's read it so that you familiarize yourself with what's there, because you never know when somebody has a question. You're like, oh, I think I saw that in, that thing in the intranet. And it also just gives you, by osmosis, almost a feel for what the organization is like. Is this an organization where people are irreverent? Is there some random employee named Roy who everybody seems to be annoyed by, or pay attention to, or whatever it is? But you pick that stuff up costlessly by just kind of sponging up all the stuff that's offered to you for free. And I deeply recommend doing that. I'd also say that some of the questions I tend to ask myself in getting to know an organization is, how centered is the organization around its leader? Some places the leader is like a monarch, and so you got to read, like, you go work at Facebook, you should probably read Zuck's recent posts to Facebook, even if he doesn't write them himself anymore. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I have no idea. You should probably read that stuff. And then I also think about, so how leader-centered is the organization? I think about how formal or informal is the organization, and then just kind of checking yourself on, like, does my language and word choice seem to fit in? But costless information is the way that I would pick that up.
Yeah, and then I think one thing that I've heard in the past that kind of can help someone understand the culture of where you're working is, like, your first couple weeks or your beginning point, you kind of have this free pass to ask, like, all the stupid questions and really try to. But I think one thing that would be important more long term would be understanding, like, who are those people within the firm that you can go to regularly and be like, hey, like, I don't get this, or I would love your feedback on this.
Totally.
And the struggle, I think, sometimes is doing that in a way that you're not a burden. So I would love to hear, like, what you think about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I just say this, this is my own personal perspective. So this is not advice, because I'm not telling people what they should do, just my story. I've never seen any employee be a burden. That's not true. I saw one employee in my life be a burden by asking too many questions, and they were not an intern. And that person used to ask me things where I would write them back and be like, really? You just asked me the definition of a word? Like, there's Google. Like, don't ask me if you can ask Google. Like, finding the problem that bothered me was not so much, oh, my time is so precious, how dare you ask me? It's like, wow, if this person doesn't get the principle that you should access information in the least costly way to the organization, who else are they taxing with, asking them the definition of a word? So it's more, every single action in an organization, what I tend to think is, what would be the implication to the organization if everybody did that, if it was a widespread practice? Like, that's my implicit thing. And the reason why I think there is a honeymoon period in the beginning of starting a new job is because that period doesn't repeat. So anything you ask in the beginning doesn't cause any harm to the organization as a whole, and you'll figure it out. So I guess I would just say, for most people who are starting, they worry too much about being a burden. And actually, many people like answering questions. I mean, I want to work in the kind of organization where the intern can walk up to the CEO and say, like, hey, it's my first day. I hear you're the CEO here. Anything I should know? And if the CEO is bothered by that, well, that says a lot more about them than it does about the intern. And, the other thing I'd just say is, many people, especially who are coming right out of school, have a dangerous mindset that is a perfection mindset, which is to say that they are overly sensitive to any one little thing going wrong. Like, they want to get it all right. They want to get the 100 on the test. Most workplaces actually punish perfection mindsets. If not explicitly, then they punish them implicitly. And what I mean by that is, the people who succeed are the ones who, like, occasionally goof on something, but usually do extraordinary stuff. And so the sooner you can get comfortable with the fact that, like, yeah, somebody might give you an awkward look if you ask a question. Somebody might whisper under their breath about you in a meeting. And that's not the end of the world. It's not a good thing. You don't want to have that happen, but it's useful data, and it's not the end of the world. And I know you said your first job, when we were talking before, was waitressing. And my guess is that, my wife was in several restaurant roles. And my guess is that in that environment, there's a lot that you just have to learn through observation. And that's the other thing I'd say is costless information, is just paying attention to, like, who seems to do a good job, what do they do, How do they do it? I remember this other moment from that summer working at NBC News where it was a long enough time ago that it's going to date me, but people can use the internet and look this up. JFK Jr.'s plane crashed and he died, I think with his wife with him. And I remember like everybody was in a flurry trying to figure out what was going on. And I looked at my boss and the other senior producers there, and they were all just kind of still, and they were working intensely, but they were still. And I walked up to him and I said, anything you need? Because I had the like, hey boss, anything you need, kind of, like the genie from Aladdin mentality, like, poof, and a little maybe annoying to the other interns, but whatever, not my problem. I was also very helpful to them. I tried to be. And he said, just notice how calm we all are. And he's like, that's not because we're built differently. It's just because practice. And that to me was an observation of like, oh, in stressful situations, I can practice being calm. And so all that stuff by observation, and eventually you try to develop the kind of relationship where people open up to you and they volunteer insights about what to do.
Totally. And I think that's a little bit of like I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but in a way you kind of have to come in with a bit of confidence and like just kind of picking up on social cues and like reading the room.
I mean, I'll give you a less loaded way of describing fake it till you make it, because we definitely had a bunch of comments the other day. By the way, if any of you out there have questions, you can ask them. We answer your questions. Ask them on the internet, wherever you find us. A gentler version of fake it till you make it is guess and be okay being wrong. It's okay to guess and be wrong, because you got to get in the practice of guessing at these things. And the other one is do things that, where you need like a little bit more confidence, a slight discomfort to do it. It's not like walk in and pretend you own the place. I mean, actually, there was an intern there that summer who walked around like she owned the place and later became a TV anchor. And I was like, that sucks. And then she got fired, I think, from her job. So she kind of sucked. But, whatever. But I do think that just dialing up a tiny bit can help. And I imagine it's very different for women than for men, and for people of color than for people who are white. I've heard one woman who I know who is an executive, an e-commerce executive, said that she often advises women to pretend that they are slightly angry. And I have no idea if this advice is good advice or not, but I think what she was trying to say was your tone of voice, if you feel like you're slightly angry, it might just sound like confidence to other people. And again, I don't take a position on that. I don't know if that advice is right. Not a woman, don't know, but it's a thing. It is an example of kind of just trying to tweak your tone a little bit that one woman who I respect gave to others.
Interesting. I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, I mean, and look, all of these little bits, they're all just kind of little tips to hold in your mind. And I kind of think of them as like cards in your hand. You play one and you see, was that the right card to play? And you're like, okay, the ace of spades, not my card. I'll try the, ace of clubs next time or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I think the women component, I mean, I know statistically speaking, it may be true, but I just think if you treat it as like owning who you are and just being confident, and then it doesn't really.
And look, and the other thing I just say is these things are generational. I mean, the things that I hate to use that word because I always thought of myself as like the young person in the workplace, but the things that worked for me at the beginning of my career, they may or may not apply to people starting their careers now. And, there's one thing I often think about asking for advice from people who are very successful. Noah Smith talked about this yesterday about like, they don't know why they succeeded. But in addition to that, I kind of think it's like looking at a star. Their light took billions of years to get to you. By the time it gets to you, it's history. Meaning the things that Mike Bloomberg did at the beginning of his career, some of them apply and some of them are probably outdated. Like, let's be real. And the next Mike Bloomberg or the next Michaela Bloomberg is not going to decide for themselves based on what they think, and they'll take that input into account, but they're not going to literally follow the prescriptions of others, or else they would not be themselves. They wouldn't be Mia. They wouldn't be Roy. They would be some fake copy of somebody else.
Yeah, definitely everything with a big grain of salt, but all very, very relevant.
Indeed. So you're feeling like your question's answered?
Yeah, totally.
At least for now. Awesome. All right. Well, to be continued. Thank you very much for spending the summer with us and for doing this. And really grateful. Oh, look, Ryan, I just want to add from Portland, who has been a collaborator on some political efforts, asked about joining a company at the intermediate level too. Okay. I think we did a past episode on that, and maybe we'll link to it. And if we didn't, Ryan, I am hereby inviting you to come on as a guest and ask this question if you are willing to. And if not, then we will take it on. But you know where to find me. All right, Mia. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.